Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of the Since I Was Young podcast, a podcast dedicated to all things Heart of Midlothian. I'm delighted this evening to be joined by John. We are going to be here just for the next little while talking about a new era that is taking place at Tynecastle as we speak. The wheels are certainly turning on that. Before I get jumped into our sort of running order for this evening's episode, I just wanted to take a moment to express myself and Ewen our appreciation to yourself, John, for your stellar episode last week. I know how daunting it is, speaking from experience, of doing a solo episode. You're effectively having a conversation with a wall, trying to gain some engagement and some interaction, which is rather tough to do, I must say. But you absolutely nailed it, as I knew that you would. It was myself and Ewen that we came together and asked you if you fancied doing a solo one, and you could have told us where to go, but you jumped at the challenge and took it on and smashed it, as we knew that you would. I was in no way worried about handing you the keys to our little podcast community because I knew, as I say, that they were in safe hands, and so it proved to be. The episode is, as I say, live on the YouTube channel. If you haven't watched it, go and watch it. John makes some fantastic points about Anne Budge and about other aspects of the football club that we kind of touched on over the last few weeks. So yeah, if you haven't, please do and give that a watch. Before we, as I say, get through the running order, thank you very much, John, for your help. You have enhanced our little podcast, I would suggest, with your contributions whenever you're called upon. Obviously, you've helped us out and been able to jump on kind of as flexible as you like, and it's massively appreciated, because that's how we keep these things running and how we keep them going. And like I say, we set a target to hit 500 subscribers, and I don't think you realise how big a part you played in us hitting that target before season's end. So yeah, as I say, thank you very much for that. And I know that Ewan will be listening to this at the moment and will echo my sentiments, because he pretty much told me as such. So yeah, before we get jumped in and start talking about Hearts, I just wanted to express my gratitude to you.
Alan, as you know, and as I've said to you privately, and as I've said previously multiple times on the podcast when I've been on, I consider it a massive privilege to be able to help you guys out wherever needed. I really appreciate your words. I really want to give a massive shout out to the audience of the podcast who checked out the show, I guess, the other week. Yeah. And just say thank you for being so kind and gentle with me overall on the first solo one, because it, like you said, it was a very daunting experience. It was not easy to do. I gained a whole new level of respect for both yourself and just anybody else who does that by themselves as standard. It is a completely different experience from anything I've ever done podcast wise. So thank you so much to everybody who commented, whether they agreed with me, and quite a couple of people did, or disagreed, and the ones I saw were bringing some decent banter to it. It was all very cordial, and it's just a pleasure to be able to help you guys out with the show whenever I can. So yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, as I said, you have become a part of the team, and it's massively appreciated, if I can't repeat that often enough. But yes, before we start speaking about Hearts, of course, folks, the pleasantries as always.
Yeah, let's talk about Hearts. It's not about me, it's about Hearts.
Exactly. I mean, this is a Hearts podcast, isn't it? After all. But yes, you can find all of our social links in the description down below. We're also on Spotify, which I've remembered to promote this week. Since I Was Young podcast, you can find us over there as well, if that's where you get your podcast fixes from. But let's dive straight into this new era. But firstly, before we talk about the new era, we have to talk about what came before. I haven't been on a show since my solo episode a couple of weeks ago now, and that was in the wake of Neil Critchley losing his job and Liam Fox taking the reins on a temporary basis. And I don't know about you. I don't want to kind of go through the last 4 games. Obviously, you spoke about his first game in charge, and there's been 3 since then. I think Liam Fox is a fantastic guy. I think he's a Hearts man. It comes across, well, he is a Hearts man. We know he's a Hearts man. It came across, and for a man like that to step in not just once but twice this season, and to have contributed what he has done, and obviously he steadied the ship, and then he steadied it again twice in one season, which is crazy, really. But it takes a lot for that, and obviously the players enjoyed working with him. And I think that a lot is to be said for that, because he's come in at 2 points this season when that was what was needed. Players were needed to be lifted, and perhaps things needed to be simplified. And that again is a big part of what he chose to do. And I think that showed with the results that he got. I think I saw the other day, and I'm sure someone will fact check me. I'm sure it was Liam Fox, of the points total that Hearts gained this season. Liam Fox was responsible for 25% of those points. So that in itself is is rather alarming. But it's a testament to him. And obviously, we'll touch on the McInnes situation and all the rest of it. But there was a part of me that felt very sorry for Liam Fox. I was really touched in his final press conference when he was physically emotional at the thought of leaving, and obviously he thanked the fans for her contributions, etc. during his time with the club. And I think he's one of us, and it's nice to see that. I hope he goes on to have a very productive career. I don't think he's done his prospects any harm whatsoever with this little interim spell at 2 points this season. I have to keep pointing that out. 2 points this season, which is just, as I say, mental. But yeah, I have a lot of respect for Liam Fox, and I think any kind of interim manager, some people maybe think it's easy to just be an interim manager. You just pop up and go, well, what did the last guy do that got him sacked? I'll just do the opposite of that, which maybe on paper is kind of the way that you look at it and the way it looks from the outside looking in. But like I say, he simplified things, and you could see that the players massively responded to that. But what were your thoughts on Liam Fox and how that kind of unfolded?
Liam Fox, Alan, in 2024-25 has very strongly reminded me of a certain other someone that you might have heard of. And that's why I've taken Alan to call in Liam Fox the Gorgie Claudio, because he has done a Ranieri not once but twice on the Jambos this year. When you consider the state we were in when he took over his first few games, and then you look at the situation we had found ourselves in the last few weeks of the season, for him to turn things around so quickly and get a tune out of that group of players with such urgency is nothing short of legendary. Almost, it's like if we had managed to keep top six because of his heroics, that would be something you would talk about for generations. Or the fact that we were bottom six by the time he took over, it's probably going to be largely forgotten about. But that kind of thing right there is so key, and so key to what happens next, more than anything, because he took that team, and like I suggested in the last episode, he took that team, and in my view, he sort of slightly McInnesized it a wee bit more. It was almost like anti-Critchley, it was anti-Naismith type football. It was less of a focus on the sexy stuff, less of a focus on the overcomplicated and convoluted systems. You simplify it, go with a 4-3-3, exploit the wide areas, and try and get the ball to your best goal scorer in a good goal scoring position. None of this farting about on the ball at the halfway line and allowing the back four or back five or back 10 of the opposition to just basically crowd around the 18-yard area and basically, none shall pass. You're not going to be able to score a whole lot of goals in Scotland playing the style of football that we've been playing, because teams will box in and just won't let you do it. Liam Fox got us playing quicker football, more attacking intent, more simple, less fanning about. And even the defence, you could see the pressure on the defence seems to have been listed. They didn't look like headless turkeys half as much as they have all season. And Ryan Fulton, I think, deserves a massive shout. And again, it ties back to Liam Fox. Credit has to be given to Liam Fox for the trust. He put the players in the right positions and he trusted them to do the job.
Yeah.
And look at what's happened. 4 wins from 4. Fantastic.
Yeah, I totally agree.
He goes with my best wishes.
Yeah, I think before we kind of move on to the next kind of talking point, just to sort of touch on what you said there about the defence and stuff as well. And obviously we're kind of reining our thoughts in a little bit on certain topics, because we do have our end of season review episode still to come, which will come in due course when we're back together as a 3, perhaps even a 4. But yeah, we'll touch on that kind of in a few weeks' time, or next week, whenever that is. But to me, the thing that impressed me the most about Liam Fox, and you kind of touched on it briefly there at the end, was the trust aspect. He's played Halkett and Kent together as a 2, and I've said this about Craig Halkett many a time. I think when Craig Halkett is fully fit, he's still our best centre half by a distance, to be honest, particularly for that style of football. That kind of no nonsense. You're not going to beat me in the air. You're not going to,
Yeah,
I'm going to dominate you kind of thing. And I know people talk about Halkett and say, oh, he's injury prone and maybe a wee bit stocky, but do you know what? He is, as I said, one of our best defenders when fit, if not our best defender. And I know, there's been constant whispers about Frankie Kent potentially moving on in the summer, be that down south or whatever else. But I think, for as much as the squad needs an overhaul, and we'll talk about that in our review episode, but as much as the squad needs an overhaul, there's games like those last few games that make me look at it and go, maybe it doesn't need as much of an overhaul in certain areas as it does in others. And I think defensively wise, I think we are quite well set. Obviously, depending on if players leave and if I think, I'm kind of reining my thoughts in because I want to keep them for later. But we've entered this new era, and the process seems to be if there is interest in a player, every player has a value, every player has a price tag. They could go. But to me, there are certain players in that group right now. And I know for 85% of the season they were absolute passengers and nobody really cared a jot. But they've not turned to bad footballers overnight, is my point. And you can see what a bit of confidence and a bit of organisation does. And maybe that's kind of ties into what you've said about the Liam Fox kind of steering us in that McInnes kind of mould, which we'll kind of segue into as we go. But before you and I give our thoughts on Derek McInnes, Ewan wanted to, he wasn't able to join us live as we record this today, but he sent over a little segment of his thoughts on Derek McInnes. So I'm going to hand it across to him, and then we will come back and give our views, and we'll take it from there.
Yes, thank you very much to Alan and John. From me personally, I do hope you are all good and well. And what is a very exciting time to be a Heart of Midlothian fan, as the boys just mentioned there, with our new head coach, Derek McInnes, in the dugout until 2029. It's, considering it's been a very low season. I would say arguably a lot more lows than there's been highs. But I think with this appointment, that's a name that's been thrown around throughout the last 5 or 6 years, and with it finally happening, I think with everything else that's in the pipeline as well for the club, I think it's a very exciting time. Um, Obviously, Alan and John are going to speak a bit more in depth about the appointment, but it's just to kind of to create some talking points and more so of the highlights from things when the announcement was made, and the press conference, etc. Like just some of the things that he spoke about. I thought the press conference in general and the interview he did with Hearts TV, you already got an instant aura about Derek McInnes. And what I mean by that is, the only kind of comparative I have is obviously Neil Critchley. I've made no the bones about it that I was never a fan of Critchley. And one of the things in particular why that was is just there was not a lot there. There was not a lot of emotion. There was not much passion. There was never a real clear cut plan into what he wanted to actually do. And one of the things that instantly made me feel that the Kinesis was arguably the right choice is that one of the things he said, not to quote him, but he said he wants his ambitions to match that of what goes on the pitch every Saturday. And, he instantly gets it. He instantly knows what Hearts' ambitions are, what a massive club it is inside and out, what the fans are about in general, and, you know, from what I got from the whole press conference and the interviews, that he wants to make Hearts a dominant, consistent football club in the Scottish Premiership. And, I guess it's kind of building that consistency again, with Hearts again. We've talked about it many times where we are a bit of a yo-yo club in the sense of, we claim to be the third best team in Scotland, which is not true. I would argue that we are the biggest, but we're certainly not the third best club in Scotland. Because again, you have to back that up with the consistency of what you put on the park every week. And, that means, consistently finishing at least in the top six in this matter. You know, Constantly competing in European football, achieving at least semi-finals, finals, the odd trophy here and there. And with everything that he talked about, it just felt comfortable. He felt very comfortable within himself. He felt comfortable with setting out the expectations he wants for Hearts, for himself, as I said before, and taking those expectations, achieving them, and then exceeding them. That's the whole aura I got from the whole press conference. And myself, and I'm sure that I could echo the same for both Alan and John, is that I'm very excited in this. In the words of Ed Graham Jones, this was Ed reset, as it were. One of the main takeaways that I took from it, and it was probably my most, I don't want to say was it Ed favorite, but the one that I kind of gravitated to, and he pointed it out himself, and it's something that we've all been saying as fans for years, that obviously not in these words, but he wants to make Tynecastle a nasty place to come for opposing teams. And, he highlighted that the fact as well that teams are starting to enjoy coming to Tynecastle. They enjoy the toxic atmosphere that the fans induce on themselves, with obviously just what's been shown on the football pitch. And, teams are kind of, gradually getting into the game. We're obviously getting frustrated with how we're playing, and the other teams are buying into that. They, as they said, and as we've all said, they love to come to Tynecastle. And I think with him saying that he wants to have, again, I'm just more, was it the paraphrasing, but he wants to make it horrible to come to Tynecastle, and that's what we want. We want every team that comes to Tynecastle every week hate it, and we want them to hate us as well, because that's what gives us our fuel, if you will, to go on and win games. Ergo, make that into a consistent thing, making Tynecastle a fortress again. And it's a massive thing, and I think fans will also take that as a massive thing going forward. And with what the Derek McInnes has to offer. And I think a lot of people saying from the outside in, I think a lot of people saying that he's a safe Ed, was a pair of hands. I would agree with that to some extent, but I think it is a bit of a disservice as well, because he's tried, he has proven, he's a very good manager. Again, with what he did with Aberdeen consistently, with the time that he was there, and keeping him in the top four, what he did with Kilmarnock was remarkable. Coming up from the Championship, the getting him into European football. Again, obviously, I know that they'll be a bit hurt, if that's the right word, from him going to us as well. But for us, I think it's a massive opportunity, and ergo, obviously, a massive opportunity to him. And I think he's going to absolutely relish it as well as us as fans. Um, and it's well, with everything else that's happening around us as well. Obviously, we're very close to seeing if the Tony Bloom investment goes through. I believe that's due to happen on the 25th or the 26th of May. With regards to the other, was it the meeting as well? Obviously, with the investment in that, if it goes through, you know, other small things like the Hummel announcement as well. That's pretty imminent, I would assume, as well. We've already got new signings coming through the door. Yeah, it's just right now, after a very horrible season, it is a very exciting time to be a Hearts fan. And I'm sure as I hand it over back to Alan and John, that they can give you a more in-depth the conversation and the dialogue about the new appointment of our head coach, Derek McInnes. So handing it over, and I will see you all very soon.
Thank you very much for your insight there, Ewan. And we can't wait to, I'm sure I speak for John as well, but we can't wait to have you back with us on the same call at the same time. But for now, 100%. Obviously, due to timing and scheduling and real life, as per usual, we were unable to all sit down today. But thank you for that, Ewan. And we'll certainly take your points as kind of jump off points as we go. But I kind of wanted to take it back to the beginning of the process. Obviously, we know we have the relationship with Jamestown in terms of their analytical data analysis company, which are basically kind of driving most of the aspects of the club, or helping to drive most of the aspects of the club, is probably the better way of putting it, and one of the myths I want to bust straight off the bat there. Of course, Derek McInnes and Graham Jones, they did their press conference, but Graham Jones was asked about the process of appointing Derek McInnes, and of course, in the media, Derek McInnes' name was kind of one of the first and only names that really came out. Obviously, there was the John McGlynn name thrown out there as well. And, I understand, obviously, those two names being names that were generated due to the club. Basically, I'm not going to say making it known, but it became known that Scottish experience was a big part of their, the top of the list of kind of criterias for a new manager, having come from Neil Critchley, who had none, aside from what he'd watched from the outside and then coming in and taking the job. So they've obviously wanted someone very experienced to drive the first stages of this new era, so to speak. And I think, a lot of people were obviously, when Neil Critchley lost his job, a lot of people were whining for a fancy manager from Scandinavia to come and ride in on his warship and save the day. But let's be honest, to me, having that experience and having that knowledge and know-how is a huge, huge bonus. And of course, every managerial appointment is a gamble. Let's be clear. I'm not sitting here saying that Derek McInnes is going to win everything. We'll save that for the predictions podcast when we do that. But I think what he brings is slightly less of a gamble than somebody that's been managing in the Swedish second division and has maybe won a trophy in the last 6 months, or things to that effect. Not that I'm saying that there's anything wrong with those type of managers, and if clubs want to go down that route, then fair play. But I think where we are right now, we're building foundations, we're building the kind of building blocks of this new era, and to do that, you want to have, and Ewan called it a safe pair of hands, and I think that's correct in a way. But like I say, every managerial appointment's a gamble, and of course, I've mentioned this before, you're never going to find a manager that is going to completely 100% unite the fan base just based off of the name. That's not going to happen. For every Scandinavian person, or for every Scandinavian manager, there would be a positive and a negative. There'd be somebody that says, who's this guy? I don't want him anywhere near my football club. And you'd get some fans going, yeah, I watch Swedish second tier football every week. He's the man to deliver, the constant success that we need. So basically, everybody's an expert at something. But for me, I applaud Graham Jones for putting that level of experience at the top of the list. That obviously those parameters were put into the Jamestown, they were presented to Jamestown and they've come back with a list. And Derek McInnes' name would have been at the top of that list. It was on the same list as Neil Critchley. We know that. That's been kind of put out there that he was identified previously as somebody, as a candidate that, could have taken the job. But for whatever reason, we won't go into it, but for whatever reason, it wasn't given to him previously. But he is the man in possession of that job now. And it's again, this is we're turning into Mythbusters here. I certainly am, but I think people think Jamestown is a decision-making tool. People think that whatever Jamestown says, that's what we will do. It's not. Jamestown is not this brain in a jar that's telling everybody what to do. Jamestown is simply an analytical tool that we are using to make informed decisions. And I think that is the kind of important thing. If we wanted a Scandinavian manager who's less than 45 years old and has been a manager for 4 years, those are the parameters that we would plug into Jamestown, and they would present us with a list of managers that match that. It only feeds off the data that you put into it, effectively, is my point. And going kind of circling back to my original point that I wanted to kind of start on before I went on my little ramble there, I think at this point in where we are right now, and I've kind of flipped and flopped on Derek McInnes. I'm not going to lie. When I first heard his name mentioned, I thought it's a bit underwhelming. I did. But that is maybe that element of we want something new, we want something exciting. Is Derek McInnes really the man that we believe can deliver that? But having taken time to think about it, and it maybe helped that I wasn't on last week's episode and it gave me a little bit extra time to think about it. Having kind of analysed everything and kind of thought about it, he is the man to take us forward, in my opinion, at least in the short term. How long that'll be, I don't know. But teams that use Jamestown and have done, having looked at that as well, particularly Brighton, and I know Brighton are on a different stratosphere to ourselves, they had a lot of managers that were hits and misses. Then they gave the job to Chris Hughton. And that was when the process started. That was when that kind of the wheels started turning. And I feel like Derek McInnes is our Chris Hughton. Is he going to be the man that takes us to where we want to be longer term? Who knows? But to me, as somebody that was originally a little bit skeptical about the Derek McInnes situation and about that kind of rumour, to now, I can see the process and I understand why the club arrived at him as the man to take that job. And that's before I even talk about the way he conducted himself in his press conference and the comments that he made. But I'll let you have a moment because I feel like I've hogged a lot of airtime there. But you can let me know what you think on that situation.
Honey, I went 52 straight minutes last time out, so it's all right. You have your time. I fully agree with the broad strokes of what you said there. Presumably, I've never used Jamestown Analytics, but I'm assuming it's not like Krang from the Ninja Turtles. Like you say, it's not a brain in a jar. I'm assuming that it's something along the lines of a kind of FIFA or Football Manager style search engine where you'll put in like a criteria of, in this case, a manager with a minimum amount of Scottish football experience, a track record of reaching a specific position with a specific amount of frequency, a tendency to sign a particular type of player, for instance, a particular win-loss record in certain situations, a particular track record with X amount of budget. I'm assuming that these will be, if not all of the criteria, some of the criteria, and presumably it'll be far more complicated than that because with these analytics things, they go very deep into the minutiae of things that happen both on and off the football pitch. Derek McInnes has vast experience managing at the top flight in Scotland. Not only that, but he has a very successful track record, particularly during his time at Aberdeen. He made it into Europe several times in a row. I feel like it was 7 years in a row that Aberdeen were in Europe. I don't know if McInnes was there that entire time, but he has a record of pushing Celtic. Now, granted, during a large part of that, Rangers were still kind of coming back up through the leagues and stuff, so it was pretty much a one-horse race, and it was only natural that someone was going to get a bit closer to Celtic out of the 11 other teams. And that happened to be Aberdeen for a few years. He won, I believe, a League Cup with Aberdeen. So he's got, a track record of winning silverware. One League Cup in a decade might not sound like a whole lot to a team like Aberdeen, but it's one League Cup more than we've won since 1963, and it's one more League Cup than most teams have won in the last several decades. So it's it's a pretty damn good track record. He is a guy who will come in the door with a plan, and with a plan that features an idea of who he wants and where he wants them. And he is not a guy who's going to take kindly to a lack of effort. And I think that these would all have been criteria that, in some statistical form, Graham Jones would have looked at with Jamestown Analytics. That's what makes this system so groundbreaking, is that it can really tear into the minutiae of what goes on, both on and off the football pitch. And it is not a shock to me whatsoever that he would have arisen as the top candidate. The one thing that did kind of surprise me when they were announcing the arrival at the press conference was how involved Gary Locke apparently was in the process. That quite shocked me. Supposedly, Lockie played a massive part in the as like a kind of intermediary. Like of some sort, like between the clubs and with Graham. Obviously, Lockie does have a history at Kilmarnock as well, so he's probably got a lot of contacts there. Derek McInnes is a guy who has a proven track record, and it's been at a club of a very similar stature to ours. And I think with the Tony Bloom investment that's presumably incoming, he could take that next step. And I think that's why probably one of the things that made this such an attractive proposition for him. It's a chance to do sort of a redo of what he did at Aberdeen, but with like a sexier budget, more resources and a better foundation ultimately, because Aberdeen didn't quite have the foundation that we have now. No pun intended. When he started there, he built them into what they became in large part. So I think that's a very attractive proposition for all involved. For him to come here with that kind of budget and with the players he's got at his disposal, and for us to bring him in, a guy who has that record, and give him that opportunity to take us to that next level, it's very exciting indeed. And I'm not shocked in the slightest that Jamestown, popped his name.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of kind of questions that sort of arose when Derek McInnes' name was linked with the job, and I think, to be honest, I think those questions came from people that were trying to convince themselves that he wasn't the right person for it. Stuff like, he's not got a great track record of signing players from outside the UK and Ireland. This very week we've announced the signing of a Greek winger, so Derek McInnes would have had to rubber stamp that, although talks were probably ongoing prior to him taking the job permanently. But of course, if Derek McInnes came in and said, actually, do you know what, I'd rather go and get somebody that I've worked with before, the club might say, okay, if you don't want this player, that's fine. They may well sign him anyway, but they may well say, look, if you can come up with someone better, then we'll get them. So, I think that like I said, the questions that came out about Derek McInnes included that, that sort of reluctance to sign players from far afield. And obviously we brought in this Jamestown analytics system to help us to identify and kind of unearth gems in untapped markets. So the two kind of contradict each other in a way. The other,
I don't necessarily agree with that, to be honest, Alan, because all you have to do is listen to the words of the man himself. He sort of quelled that or quashed that rumour with the statement that it's the job of Graham Jones in Jamestown. He's going to look for the best players. He's going to look for players that will fit his style of play. The thing with him that I think is more concrete than the past couple of managers is that he has that, that clarity of thought and the idea of how he wants his team to play that hasn't been obvious, and one that I think ultimately, more crucially, really vibes with how Scottish football is played.
I think it's certainly, like I say, there are lots of people that asked a lot of questions, and the signings one was a part of it, the recruitment side. And obviously we know Hearts have that framework in place, and he will have been told about it. And of course he'll have been looking at it from the outside in, and maybe kind of a wee bit unsure about it, but having had it explained to him and understand how the process works and how it's going to work, if he wasn't keen to work with it, he would turn around and say, well, actually, I'd rather go and manage a club that do it the traditional way. Let's be honest, Derek McInnes, a job would come up for him that he would want to have. But obviously, a point that kind of I wanted to make as well. I listened to the Scarves Around the Funnel, and Mark Donaldson spoke about just how much Derek McInnes was keen to take this job on, and that was before he was appointed. And that kind of feeds into that. That's almost like Derek McInnes has been presented with the opportunity to talk to Hearts. He wants to talk to Hearts. He's going to come to Hearts if the clubs can agree, fees, etc. And obviously that ended up not being too much of an issue because of how keen Derek was to come into Hearts. And I think that, like you said, it just speaks volumes of the man and the club and the foundations that we've laid. That is that attractive proposition for him to say, now's the right time to go there. Obviously, we don't know if he's been approached in the past. I assume not, considering some of the managers that we've had in that time. But for him to be approached now, this is a good time for him, and this is important that we make the most of that. But another one of the questions that was kind of thrown around was, and this was my main point, and this is, like I said, I was rather skeptical around the appointment of Derek McInnes due to the style of play that he has implemented during his time at previous clubs, and particularly kind of, you spoke earlier about when we were talking about Liam Fox, about that need to just play effective football, do away with the sexy stuff, just play effective football that wins games. That is, in my view, what a Derek McInnes blueprint will be. Having listened to him in his press conference, I am much more sold that he feels he has the tools at Hearts to do that and will be given the tools to help him do that. I was a little bit worried because of the Route 1 physical nature of his previous sides. I want to go to Tynecastle and be entertained. I want to go to Tynecastle and I want to enjoy it. I want to go there and I want to watch entertaining football. Does it have to be sexy stuff? Does it have to be tiki-taka, passing it sideways and backwards till you get one Hail Mary pass over the back line and the quick forward gets in and scores a goal? Not necessarily. I just want to go to Tynecastle and be entertained. And the way that can happen is by going to Tynecastle and watching your team win football games. It's about the evolution of a system and a style and a team. And I think if we are starting simple and quote unquote basic, it's not a bad place to start. And I read the Heart Standard article that was put out recently about the evolution of Derek McInnes' tactical style. And if you are subscribed to the Heart Standard and you haven't read it, go and read it, because if, like me, you were worried about style of play, take 5 minutes, read that, and you'll be your fears will be at ease. And plus, listening to his press conference where he spoke about what he wants a Hearts side to look like, and obviously Ewan touched on it, that physical nature, but also that sort of aggressive, quick, hit you between the eyes, I think were the words that he used in his press conference. And all of that, and he spoke about pace and width, and it's easy to talk about these things when you're looking from the outside in going, what was Hearts' problem during the season? Why did they finish bottom six? Okay, they didn't have pace, they didn't have width. So I'm going to go in there and give them pace and width. It'd be easy for a manager to do that. Let's be clear. But you can look at Derek McInnes' sides in the past, and you spoke about his Aberdeen side. He had Johnny Hayes and Niall McGinn as wide midfielders. Fantastic wide midfielders, let's be honest. They were productive for him. Yep. I think it was Adam Rooney who was the striker. I know there's a few Aberdeen fans that listen to this podcast, so if any of my Aberdeen references are off, feel free to correct me for the engagement in the comments, for the engagement. But yeah, I might just get a few wrong on purpose just to see if people pick up on them. But he then carried that on to his spell at Kilmarnock, where he had obviously Armstrong, who we've been linked with in recent windows, and the guy on the other side whose name completely escaped me. He played against us in the final game of the season there. And then Vassell up front, the big physical target man striker. Now, that to me, those were the strengths of Kilmarnock this season. Armstrong and Vassell having a big man up front that, if not a plan A, at least provides a plan B. And I think, when I spoke about Neil Critchley and his departure from the club, a big part of what I said in my solo episode was Critchley didn't really have a plan B because he didn't have the tools available to himself to have a plan B, because he alienated them, let's be honest, by not using them often enough, which is why we now enter the market and the need to sign about 50 wingers because we literally have none.
Yeah,
But
we got Alan
obviously,
Forrest, and he's out of contract, so
oh gosh,
and he's only really
I,
got a small sample size of 4 games to really show for this
I,
season. It was an excellent 4 game span, but that's really all we've got in terms of wingers and actual contribution this year. Like,
I will cry the day that Forestino leaves that football club. I will cry. I've
I
been
know you
waving the
will.
Alan Forrest flag for a very long time. But again, we'll save those thoughts for the end of season review, which we're not at yet. I feel like that's going to be a long episode, so it'll be interesting for that one. But going back to McInnes and
It's
his
going to be
sort
a
of
mini
way,
series.
we might have to. We might have to just spread it across
Yeah,
the summer, just so that we've not got any lack of football content for a while.
yeah,
But going back to McInnes and his sort of blueprint and that fast, aggressive nature of his teams, and even speaking about Hearts players, there was an interview that Benny gave to, I think it was the Evening News, where he spoke about a Derek McInnes Kilmarnock side, and he said, "I never like playing Kilmarnock. I don't like playing Kilmarnock. I don't like that." And he himself was worried how he would fit into a Derek McInnes system. And you can understand that because there might be players at Hearts that go, obviously, this is before Derek McInnes was unveiled and did his press conference. And I'm sure probably put a lot of those players and supporters' minds at ease, like mine. Benny's looking at this manager who sets a team up with a low block to hit counter attack with wide wingers and a big target man forward. If I'm Benny Beningame, I'm sitting there going, I can't play like that. How do I fit into that? So his comments and his remarks were absolutely on the money for me. But he then spoke about speaking to Shankland. Obviously, Shankland had previous with Derek McInnes at Aberdeen, and that's it's helpful to have players that go, it's effective, it works. We've seen the success, and you mentioned it, and Ewan mentioned it about his successes at Aberdeen and Kilmarnock. Derek McInnes might not play sexy, attractive football, but it's effective and it works and it's an identity. And it's that DNA that we've been crying out for a very long time, because I think Hearts squads in recent years have been good squads of players. Let's not sugarcoat it. We've had good squads, we've had good players, but that
hmm
DNA, that identity goes missing when you chop and change managers who then come in, have an idea of what they want to do, and then change that idea. Because we've seen Neil Critchley did it. He came in, and I remember the first few interviews with Hearts players when Critchley came in, it was he simplified it, he made things simple, and it was effective and it was working. And then suddenly we lose Cammy Devlin to a concussion, which has him sidelined for 6 weeks. And suddenly we're playing an entirely different system with players that were on form falling off a cliff because they've been moved around the pitch and they're not playing in their natural places. We've
Yep.
seen Stephen Naismith doing exactly the same thing, and I've said this on many, many episodes of this, probably for as long as we've been doing it. Scottish football, you don't need to be Pep Guardiola to be successful in Scottish football. You don't need to have a
Yeah.
master playbook of tactics to be a success in Scottish football. Scottish football has a certain identity and a certain brand and a certain DNA, effectively. And teams like Celtic and Rangers, more so Celtic at the moment, they can go into Europe and play in Europe against big sides. They get found out because of that. But those two, and I'm still putting Rangers in. I know Rangers are a little bit of a crossroads at the moment, but their budgets, their playing staff is still ahead of where we are. Let's be honest. We could maybe have laid a glove on them this season. It would have been nice. Some clubs have done. We didn't, for whatever reason. And again, I'll save my thoughts on that. But if we can find an identity and a way of playing that Derek McInnes wants to bring in, and that press conference, sitting there watching him, sitting next to Graham Jones, I found myself over the course of a 20-minute interview going from thank fuck that season's just finished to when does the next one start? Can we start tomorrow? You know,
Right
that's
with you, man. Yeah.
that for me is that feeling that you want, and I listened to Derek McInnes talking about Hearts in general, and his enthusiasm for the club was so apparent. And Ewan mentioned it, contrasting that with Neil Critchley and how he was it is night and day, and it's not, it's not a slight on Neil Critchley. It comes with that experience, and Neil Critchley strikes me as a man that is very well media trained. Derek McInnes strikes me as that old dog that's been around the block, knows what to do, just gets the job done, and that for me is a big part of why I am enthusiastic more now than I was about McInnes. But again, I've gone on a ramble and a rant, so I'm going to give it back to you, and you just try and feed off that.
Yeah, no, there's almost echoes to me in terms of his media handling in that first press conference from McInnes of the kind of more positive side of Craig Levein as Hearts manager. When he was talking to the media, he's got a history and a reputation for being too blunt at times. He was very straightforward, McInnes, in what attracted him to the job, what he expects from Hearts, and where he thinks Hearts have kind of gone wrong. Like he's saying, we should be annoying teams. We should be making it impossible for teams to play at Tynecastle, because he went back to the 1990s, to the late 1990s, to the 2000s, Hearts teams that he played, Jim Jeffries teams. He mentioned Craig Levein's Hearts teams in the early 2000s, teams he played against, and he could not wait to come to Tynecastle because of the atmosphere. But when he was at Tynecastle, it was one of the most difficult places to play. That's the kind of fortress Tynecastle mentality that he wants to bring back. And that was fantastic from McInnes. I feel like we need that. We need someone who is enthusiastic as much as talented. And I think to that point, to get a manager as experienced and talented as McInnes, and to get him so enthusiastic about the job and feeling like he has something to prove at Hearts and something that he can get out of the project, that only to me suggests that he is ready to give everything he's got to this role.
Yeah.
And that's going to be excellent to see. He's not going to be around the bush. He's going to have expectations. He wants to win silverware. He's told us that he wants to win silverware at Hearts, and he believes that Graham Jones and Jamestown Analytics. Sorry, Jonestown was a different thing. I hope it doesn't turn into Jonestown. Graham Jones, Jamestown Analytics, and the Tony Bloom investment that's presumably on the way. He feels like that is the perfect storm for him to finally come to Hearts. It's a job that he's wanted for several years. He's mentioned it himself. Like you said, Mark Donaldson was talking about how enthusiastic he's been about the possibility of one day managing Hearts. It's great to see. You want that. You want someone who's like, I want that job because here's what I feel I can add to that, and here's what I think we can achieve together. What you don't want is someone who has no real experience or knowledge of Scottish football sitting in a press conference answering questions as best he can, and ultimately the best you're getting from it is seems a pretty good guy. He's got some ideas. With McInnes, he's got ideas. He's got a clarity of thought. He's got a plan. He doesn't have ideas. He has a plan, and he's got the experience to back it up.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think there were quotes from the press conference that I could reel out to you, but I think we all know them having listened to it. I thought Graham Jones came across very well. He's a man we've not heard a lot from publicly, but I just enjoyed him sitting there next to Derek McInnes, looking like somebody that, you know what, I've got who I wanted, and that is massive. Like a part of it that kind of one of the points that I wanted to make, probably more so towards the end, so I don't know how much more we're going to go into, but a big part of it for me was when Graham Jones mentioned Derek McInnes was the man that I presented to the board. He was the one that I wanted. I wanted this man. I did my homework. He obviously didn't say it in as many words, but you could tell that he was forcefully basically saying, this is my guy. This is who I want. He presented that report to the board, and they said, yes, that's the man that we can get behind. Anne Budge obviously did so from her yacht in Greece, but we won't go into that.
After me sitting there defending her for almost an hour last week, she goes on fucking holiday and makes us wait for this. Oh, honestly, that immediately highlighted two things to me. One was I was very impressed by Graham Jones' determination. He was like this. It's good to see someone who apparently has the competency to have that, this is the guy and here's why. And it speaks to the board having, the requisite trust in Graham Jones in the role. because, like you say, we haven't really heard much from him. He was like cigarette smoking man in the first episode of the X-Files, just standing in the corner for several months. And
So
then all of
true.
a sudden he's in the massive warehouse putting away the dodgy stuff, and all of a sudden it's this guy actually means business. He was partially involved in Critchley, as they mentioned, but this is all him, and he's tied himself to Derek McInnes. I like that. I like to see a guy who's just like, right, this is the way forward, and here's the plan, and here's why that's the plan.
Yeah,
Clarity of speech, clarity of the objective. It's been something that's been sorely missing for a while.
definitely. No, I totally agree with you. I'm not sure what else you, or if there's any other kind of points that you wanted to raise from the sort of various things that we've had from the Derek McInnes interviews and obviously the Graham Jones side of things. But one thing that really struck me, as you mentioned there about Graham Jones, it looks to me, and Andrew McKinley, even before the press conference had even started, Andrew McKinley said, "You've heard a lot from me over the last little while, so I think it's important you hear from the
Too
football
much.
people." Because, we hear a lot from him without really any information being kind of put out there, but
Yeah.
that's just the man himself. But what I took away from his comment, and it might have just been a throwaway remark that he made, but it was quite interesting to me because he said, I can't remember it word for word exactly, but it was something along the lines of, "You've heard a lot from me over the last few months. I think you've come here to hear about the football, so let's hear from the football people." That quote for me was massive because then in comes Derek McInnes and Graham Jones, and I'm thinking these two guys have been given the keys to this,
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that with the Jamestown stuff, and like you said about the financial side of it, and the Bloom investment, which I believe the vote takes place on the 26th of this month, as Ewan mentioned in his little piece. Assuming that all goes well and assuming Hearts fans don't find yet another way to embarrass ourselves in this wonderful season, that investment could be game changing, and I believe that it will be. But we'll talk about that further down the line as and when it becomes a reality. These two guys having the keys to this new era and this new way of doing things, it does excite me. Obviously, there will be things that don't work. There will be signings that we make that don't work out. Obviously this week, as I say, we've announced the signing of a Greek winger, Alexandros Kizaridis, I think is as best as I'm going to do at the moment. There will be more to come. By the time this goes out, we might have even signed another 5. Who knows? But it's exciting times ahead. And like I mentioned previously, I went from at the final whistle of the Kilmarnock game, sitting there going, "Thank fuck that's over. Let's get on summer holidays and let's forget football exists for a few weeks before we then come back for the League Cup group stages," which I will add, I think is a fantastic jumping off point for Derek McInnes to start with those games. We've spoken before about pre-season being a bit shit. I think this season this coming season, we don't have that excuse because we will have these competitive games right off the bat, and that can be nothing but a good thing, in my opinion. But yeah, like I said, I've gone from feeling down and thinking, thank God we're off with that season, it's done, it's finished, I don't have to worry about football, I don't even think about it, to can the players just not go on holiday and we just start tomorrow? Like, Derek McInnes has, in that 20-minute interview, got me on board, and I'm sure I'm not the only fan that was a little bit skeptical, like I say, to then now be sitting there going, this is the guy. The way he spoke, the way he put things across, and you mentioned it about his references back to Hearts teams of old. We want Hearts to be that side. He wants that. He's talking about the atmosphere. He's talking about Tynecastle. He's trying to get the fans on board and saying, I need you. I need Jamestown. And there was a quote that he mentioned, and I'll just do this one quickly before I give you it back. There was a quote that he said, which was, "Graham and his team are responsible for building a squad. I make that a team." And that, to me, is a big part of it. People questioned Derek McInnes' thoughts on Jamestown and whether he'd be into it. With that quote alone, it's like he's bought into it and he knows this is how it's going to be and he's excited for it. And I'm excited to see how this new era unfolds. Like I say, giving Derek McInnes the keys to Tynecastle was, I feel, almost as safe as I felt giving you the keys to this podcast last week. That's how I'll wrap up my thoughts and my point of view before we end. But have you got anything you want to add to that?
Welcome to Gorgie, Derek. I'm calling him Derek for now. I'm wondering when we start calling him Dale. When are we familiar enough until we can start calling him Big Dale? No,
when we start seeing
I'm
results.
yeah, I'm really quite excited for next season. Obviously wish Neil Critchley all the best. I wish Liam Fox all the best, especially. I'm really pulling for him to get a decent wee job somewhere, presuming that he wants to stay in management. I think that last run of form that we had at the end of the season should be good for the CV. And yeah, like I can't wait to see what comes next. There's only positive at the moment at Hearts. It feels like all of a sudden, after a really wretched, horrible season, it looks like the sun's coming up finally. So yeah, just very positive vibes. And I don't really have much else to go into just now because the rant I want to have, I'm going to have to save for the end of season review.
Yeah, there were one or two other things that I wanted to kind of touch on, but I think until we get more news on those things, we can't really touch on them. Obviously, there's the futures of our captain and goalkeeper, two kind of opposite ends of the park that we will have to kind of see how those things unfold. But I'm gonna safely assume that we're gonna wrap it up there, folks. Please do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Are you like me? Were you skeptical about McInnes, and are you fully on board now, or have you just thought right from the start, he's the man we should have had years ago? Why have we waited this long? Thank fuck he's finally here. I think those are the two schools of thought. But yeah, if you have any other comments or any other thoughts on any of the points that we've raised in this week's episode, please do feel free to drop them in the comments below. We should, all being well, have our next episode be that end of season review that John is eagerly anticipating. So that should be our next episode. As and when that will come out will obviously depend on scheduling and, as I said, real life getting in the way at the moment. But yeah, we'll give you notice and we'll let you know, and obviously we'll be asking for your input and your comments and thoughts. So if, as I say, if there's any points you want us to cover in that episode, let us know in this one. But yeah, I'm going to leave it there for this week. As ever, thank you, John. I feel like I've said that about 50 times today, but thank you, John, for joining me this evening. It's nice to be back having a conversation with somebody else, because obviously you did a solo episode, I did one previous, so it's nice for us to come together and talk about positive Hearts-related things. It's been quite a long time since we had a lot of positive thoughts in an episode. So yeah, I'm going to wrap it up there, folks. Whatever you're up to, enjoy, and roll on League Cup group stage football. McInnes ball is incoming, and I am very much here for it. Take care. Have a good one. Bye for now.